So today we've got 4 whiskies to taste. The first one we're going to taste is a 2005 15-year-old Strathisla. The second one we have a 20-year-old Strathisla from the 1940s. The third whisky we'll taste is a 1976 Strathisla. And the last whisky we're going to taste is the product that distilled at the Milton Distillery, distilled in 1949 and bottled as a 72-year-old.
Yes, what is your liquid library?
Well, firstly, we have a warehouse. We have all these casks, greatly aged, right the way back to the 1940s. So that's a starting point for the library. But also we're really lucky that we have a range of samples which were drawn many years ago. So cask samples, drawn from casks from the 1940s, 50s, 60s. So it gives you that ability to really sort of look at whisky and see how it's developed, how it's matured. And I think that's the secret for us about saying, how do we know when a whisky's right? Because we've got this library which allows us to understand how the whisky has interacted with the cask and be able to see it over certain parts of its life.
Right, where do we start?
We should start with the youngest one, I think.
This is a lovely, I must say, I wouldn't have guessed it to be only 15 years old. And I'm getting a lovely, it's like Straven toffee, which is a sort of tablet, you know, tablet toffee. Nice creamy mouthfeel. I tell you what, I'm getting treacle toffee. And do you know the strength of this one?
Yeah, so this is 56.9.
You really wouldn't guess from the nose. It's
there's very little prickle.
Ever so delicate, and actually, as we've sat here and it's opened up wonderfully, there's sort of like almond cake, dried fruits, getting sort of the dried cherries.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Absolutely lovely. But from the 15-year-old, a contemporary 15-year-old, we also have a little bit older, but a 20-year-old here, but it's not a bit of a different 20-year-old.
The unique sort of aspect of this is that this is from Milton Distillery, but it's Strathisla whisky. Yes. So this is a whisky distilled in 1949, but from our archive we have this sample which was drawn from the cask in 1960. So this is really a unique opportunity to taste a moment in time when this whisky was still maturing.
You know, one thing I often find in these old whiskies is, or old in the sense of when they were distilled, is wax. And I find that's a very attractive characteristic, almost like candle wax. I
always feel when I nose and taste an old whisky, they have a certain character to them, which is dusty, oily, waxy. And if we think back to 1949 when this distillery was operating, they would have been just a very, very sort of functional working distillery. And I think the whisky is evocative of that.
It's wonderful. As this is opened up, I'm really starting to get sort of lovely, heady, slightly herbal notes, blood orange. It's reminding me a bit of drinking a sort of an Americano cocktail, you know, aperitivo time in the sunshine.
Delicious.
Well, as we've had sort of one slice of history, I think I'm ready for another slice. What's our next dram?
So here's a Strathisla from 1976. An incredible strength in this whisky, I think, is one to note. This whisky was bottled at cask strength at 60.7.
Good Lord. Again, there's a slight spiciness. It's more spicy than bitter in the finish.
So, gentlemen, we've had our 3 appetizers. Now we
get the moment we've been waiting for.
So we return to Milton Distillery, bottled as a 72-year-old, and something which we believe when we release will be unique, because we won't call it Strathisla. It is from Milton Distillery. So we believe this is potentially the only ever cask to be bottled, described as from Milton Distillery. So a true moment in history, really.
Gosh, great. Well, I feel privileged to be asked to taste it.
Definitely. Let's give it a go.
Oh yes, it's got that lovely old-fashioned nose, hasn't it? Candle wax.
It is interesting. I'm really definitely getting that sort of that orange note that I've picked up through all of them, but this time it's almost more like the fresh flesh of a blood orange when you've opened it, you know, just opened one up rather than the sort of the bitter peels.
Could it be marmalade?
There's also a lovely sort of a very, very delicate sort of cereal note. You know, people talk about musty smells from whiskey, and but it's more like reminds me of walking into a floor malting when the barley's all been laid out. but it's very subtle behind all that fruit and peel.
Wonderful.
That is sublime.
I'm going back to the first one, tablet. There is that slight bitter note, which is like orange peel in the finish. Sweet to begin with, and then with a slightly tart finish. Long, warm.
Ooh.
And what kind of cask was it?
It's a sherry puncheon cask.
Puncheon, 500 litres.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to taste this. I mean, this is a real one-of-a-kind experience, a one-of-a-kind dram, and as we've discovered, you know, even when you go back through the history of this distillery, there's nothing quite like this Milton.
I never go public on scores, but I score privately out of 10, where 10 is only found in heaven. But my goodness, this is getting pretty close to 10.
Yeah.
It's way up in the 9 and 3/4. It's absolutely gorgeous whiskey. Thank you very much indeed. Slange.
Slange.